Hello, this is Mike at Gamefromscratch, and welcome to something completely new. I'm going to try something today with, as you can guess if you look in front of you, Blender. What I'm going to do is set an alarm for 1 hour, and I am now going to talk to you for exactly 1 hour about Blender, starting exactly now. Okay, the alarm has been set. Okay, apparently I screwed that up. We are going to talk for 1 hour and 1 minute, so that gives me time for an introduction. The entire idea here is going to be if you've never used Blender before in your life and you're wondering about it. I'm not actually going to show you too much, but I'm going to show you sort of a getting started. One of the biggest challenges with Blender is it's a little, we'll go with the word complicated. There's a lot to it. It has a very in-depth, somewhat difficult interface to tackle, and where you're going to probably struggle the most is in your first hour. So I'm going to give that hour to you. We're going to look at just the basics, navigating around, how to set up your preferences, how to pan the scenes and the cameras, the very basics of modeling. We're not going to get into the specifics. So I'm not going to show you how to do like polygonal modeling or texture mapping or any of those things, at least probably not just beyond here's how texture mapping works, not here's how you texture map, if you can know the difference between the two. I will probably show you some of these things, but I'm not going to go into any detail. This is just an overview of Blender. Now, right up front, let me sell Blender a little bit. First off, it's completely free, and it's completely open source, and it's been around for probably 15 years now as Blender. It started off as something called NAN, Not a Number Productions out of, I think, the Netherlands, somewhere over in Europe. They used it as an in-house program for their own visual effects. And we're talking back early 90s, possibly even earlier. And then eventually they started selling it as a product. And Not a Number eventually went out of business, but they also had a kind of probably the first Kickstarter campaign to release the source code. And it was funny because it was for like $100,000 or something. And if you look at the Kickstarter numbers now, it's insane. But they had this crowdfunding campaign and it worked. And Blender became this open source software. And a lot of open source software officially pretty much dies at that stage. But not in Blender's case. It's actually gone on and thrived. And for the longest time, it hit about version 2.4. And 2.4 was kind of the evolution of that freely released piece of software. And then 2.5 and 2.6 came along, and those were about making Blender more accessible, more feature compatible with the other products out on the market. And the reality is now, we're sitting here, and I'm using Blender 2.73, as you can see, and it is in some ways better, in some ways worse than Max Maya, Houdini, and all the other packages that are out there. It has its strengths, it has its weaknesses, but it is pretty much now a peer. It used to be you used Blender because it was free. Now you use Blender because it's free and good. So if you are looking for a 3D modeling software, Blender is a very good choice. On the same level, when I'm going through this tutorial here, I'm going to try and stay mouse-based with everything I do. When I do press keys or keyboard, I'll probably try and tell you what they are, but Blender's a very, very keyboard-focused workflow, but it's not the easiest to learn with the keyboard. Those are things that once you know what you're doing, you'll learn the hotkeys and they'll speed you up. But learning with the hotkeys isn't really necessary. Now, at the same time, on Gamefromscratch, I've actually already done, let me just load it up here, I've done a pretty intense step-by-step Blender tutorial series. So if you do go through this and you think, wow, that looks pretty awesome, jump into this because you'll just see, like, we're gonna touch on navigation a little bit, but here's the navigation tutorial, for example, and I'm actually showing you all the various different modes and selections that you can do, and then keyboard shortcuts that were used. So if you want to learn the keyboard shortcuts or all the numbered key shortcuts, etc., definitely go to Gamefromscratch and run through this tutorial. It's on the left-hand side. It walks you through knowing absolutely nothing to having a complete game-ready asset, specifically this guy. You'll create that over all of these various parts. So today we're looking just at introduction, welcome to Blender, and hopefully you'll find this useful and interesting. Again, if you've already used Blender, it's probably a waste of time to even watch this because you already know all this stuff. So this is Blender. You can download it from blender.org. It can come as a single file executable or as an installer. No real difference between the two other than where files get put. And then when you're ready, just run the Blender executable and you will come here. And this is your default scene. this is kind of a confusing concept to get your head around in Blender, is a lot of the settings and the configurations and all that are actually stored in the blend file. So when you make changes to your user interface and such, the blend file being the file that Blender saves as the file format it uses, it also saves all the configurations and settings. So if you change the windows up, you rearrange things, etc., and then you save the blend, that all goes with it. And this is kind of a double-edged sword because, like, for example, if you download someone else's blend, you get their settings, and it's very irritating at times. But also, there are default settings. Default settings are pretty important things, and we'll start off right there because one of the biggest ones, and it's directly relevant to me, is I use a laptop. That means I don't have a number. I have an external number pad actually because it's very useful for Blender. But a lot of people will not have a number pad in their system anymore. So one of the very common things to do is to change out the number pad settings. And that is just go up to the file settings here and go to user preferences. Again, it's daunting because there's all kinds of them. But what you want to do is go into input and just click emulate number pad. And then what that'll do is it'll turn your number 1 through 0 into the number pad equivalent. Now the nice thing is with the number pad, you'll use this like quick camera adjustment. So the top is the up arrow, which is the equivalent of the 8 key. Left is the 4, right is the 6, and down is the 2. Or the control and opposite version is the inversion. So right to left, etc. Up, the opposite, anyways. So that is a very key setting if you're running on a laptop. And another one that you want to do is change the way that orbiting works. We'll touch on that later. It's not really important for today, but user settings are very critical. So you want to come to user preferences and set things up however you want. Also, if you do not have a 3-button mouse, well, to be honest, if you don't have a 3-button mouse for the scroll bar, don't play with Blender. It's useless. It's not worth it. Get yourself a 3-button mouse with a scroll wheel, period. An external one, whatever. Trying to do 3D without, on any application, with Max Maya, with Blender, any of them, it's an exercise in futility. Just don't do it. So I'm going to assume from this point on that you have a 3-button mouse with a scroll wheel. End of story. But if you don't, there's a button here and it gives you options for faking it. But the user experience is terrible. Spend the $15, get a generic mouse if you have to, or spend the $100 and get a good mouse, but have an external mouse when working in 3D. It is essential. Okay, so welcome to Blender. This is the main interface. And what you see here is the starting scene. You will always get this scene when you start up. And it's a cube, a point light, and a camera. This is your the physical definition of a camera. And I'm going to show you something right away. There's a bunch of views. So we're in the 3D mode right here. So I guess this is actually kind of a key thing to talk about. Blender is customizable to a level that you can't even fathom. It's probably one of the most configurable UIs you have ever seen. And once again, when you save your blend, your configurations go with it. And you look up here, and there's a set of different tasks that you could do in Blender. So you see 3D view, which will give you like a minimalistic 3D only view. Very handy if you're just modeling and you've mastered the keyboard shortcuts. Next up, you've got animation oriented view. And here you got a lot of scary things. Don't worry, we'll get back to them. But things like your dope sheet, your F-curve editor, your timeline, and then a scene view, and another scene view from your camera's perspective, and then your scene itself as the scene graph view of it, and then finally your properties. And then we can switch over to, for example, compositing for doing video editing, etc. Your default, which is where we started. Your game logic. Blender has a complete game engine built in. It allows you to actually build your game directly in Blender, sort of like you would build a game in Unity. So you could create all your art, your assets, and everything in Blender, but then you could also like add logic to them. It's scripted with Python. It's way beyond what we're going to talk about here, and if I'm honest, I'm not a huge fan of it. But if you are a Python fan and you are wanting to make games and you're looking for a game engine and you're already using Blender, you can consider using Blender's game engine that is built in. So this is a view for editing things in the game engine. Motion tracking, pretty specialized, but for matching motions between different video sources or scenes. Your scripting view, you complete Python programming interface within Blender itself. This is optimized for that. UV editing. UV editing, if you're brand new to 3D, UVs can be thought of as the coordinates on a surface. So you have a set of UV coordinates, and UV is just the same as XY. It's just XY and Z have already been used, so obviously they used U and V. And a U coordinate is a position here, and a V coordinate is a position here. So using those two numbers together, it kind of gives you a 2D coordinate on a 3D object. So that's essentially what a UV is. And a UV map is what takes 3D shape and bends it back to a 2D shape. We'll look at that in a little bit, but UV mapping is very critical to UV unwrap something to make it flat, and then you draw on it, you paint on it, which is called texture mapping. So those two things to go together are what make it so you're not just dealing with boring flat shapes. Again, we'll see that in a little bit, but this is a scene that's optimized towards UV editing. And then finally, video editing. Amazingly enough, Blender is a complete non-linear editing environment. There's about 12 or 13 programs on the market that do this. A lot of them are very, very expensive. But what it allows you to do is basically edit video clips, images, text over, all that kind of stuff into a final product. So it allows you to have, two videos running at the same time, layer on audio on top of that, overlay an image over top of that. So it's a good way to produce a final video. And actually, if you go through Gamefromscratch's old video channel, or you search on Gamefromscratch.com, there's actually a tutorial on video editing on, let's see if I can pull that up. Oops. There you go. I've actually done a tutorial on video editing in Blender. So you can do these neat little layer overs, put video in, layer them after each side, butt them up after each other. Sort of like what I use Camtasia for when I'm done with these videos. That's all built into Blender. It's very impressively there. It's kind of getting off. A lot of people don't ever have to do any video editing. Like a lot of times for games, you're not actually, unless you're generating cutscenes, you're not editing video for the most part. Your output is not an AVI or an MP4. It's normally a series of stills, or it's the 3D objects themselves. But if you are in need of editing video, Blender is capable of it. Now, I will be honest here, it's also unstable as hell. So I don't actually use it for video editing anymore. It just crashes way too much for my liking. Hopefully it's something that'll improve in time, or perhaps it's something to do with my system. I'm not particularly certain, but that's what this mode is here. So as you can see, there are a lot of different default views in Blender. And then there's a couple things to be aware of. Is you've got this tool panel over here, and then there over here you have this little plus. All right, now there's two keys I'm going to throw at you right now, T and N. Learn them. You're going to use them a lot. T, now you notice our toolbar just went away. Our tools just dropped away. Hit T again, it comes back. T gone, N. So those are your properties, are the N. Press it again to get rid of it. Or you can also look right here. There's this little plus guy. If you click it, it opens it up. Over here, this little plus, click it, it opened up. And the tools are dynamic to the type of window you're working in. So if you're working in a 3D view, you'll get 3D specific tools. So you see here like tools for transformation, tools for creating different primitives and shapes, tools for setting relationships between things, animation, key insertion. We'll talk about that in a little bit. These are all dynamic to the type of window you're working at. We'll look at the window changing in 1 second. It's a very important concept to start with. And over here are your properties. It's confusing because properties is also the name of this guy. But properties are things like, I don't know, settings, configurations. A lot of times you don't go in here too much. But let's say, so here, this is a cube that's at 0, 0, 0, and 0. If you want to be very precise in your control, you can change that here. We'll go to a 1, and you see it moves over. Or I can go on back, or I can lock that so that it's not even possible to move it in that direction anymore. So there's a set of settings that are available in this menu as well that are very specific to whatever window you're dealing with. So T and N, hide and show these two windows, or these little pluses right here and right here. Get to know those, very valuable. A lot of times you're going to want to get rid of them just to get a little bit more space back like I just did. And again, it's the T key is the left one, the N key is the right one. Or you use these little pluses, or I think you can close it that way. Okay, so those change based on the type of window you're dealing with. Now let's talk about that for a second, because that's a very key thing to understand. This here is a 3D view. You're going to spend a lot of time in 3D view. This is where you do a lot of your modeling, a lot of your different editings and such. But as I said earlier, let's say we were working with a texture map instead. So what we want to do then is go to a completely different view. See this icon right here. All of our windows have it. You see that sometimes it's at the top, like so, and sometimes it's at the bottom, like so. Even your menu up here, this file open, blah, 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 it's actually an embedded window, which is kind of cool. So let's go to our 3D view, and instead of doing 3D editing, we want to get up our image editor, like this guy. So all you do is you select the icon in the corner, and you bring it up. And now we're in the image editing mode. So if I wanted to create a new image, there. We just created a new graphic. Now we're in a completely different editor. I'm going to hit T and N. And you'll notice we have completely different settings that are context sensitive to the type of window you're working in. Very handy, very useful. So now that we're in here, this is actually the straight out texture editor. This is where you can look at your 2D renders, you can edit images, you can, let's even just go over. So go over to paint mode of this image. So now I've actually got different tools up here. Look up here. So I'm in texture draw. I'm going to go to cloning, masking, smearing, softening, etc. I'll stay with texture draw. I'll go with the blue. We can actually, it's a full 2D image editor built in here. It's strangely powerful too. Alpha editing, different blend modes, quite a few different blend modes. Texture oriented stuff is all done in here. That's your image editor. Now you notice this is a two-parter. There's UV/image editor. The first part is for that UV mapping, that the unwrapping a 3D object into 2D thing I was talking about earlier, so you can apply this texture to it. We'll come back to that in a second. So we're back to our default scene. One of those things you're going to want to know right off the hop is, do I want this? Do I want this? Do I want this? Do I want this every single time I start up Blender? And you're going to get it. This is the default scene. This is how it looks. So if you decide you don't, you can just grab something. So see, here's the camera here. You can either go Object, and then I actually never do this, so I don't know where. You gotta have it here. Delete right there. So again, I always use the keyboard shortcut on this one. That's why I had trouble finding it there. You'll notice it also says the X. So that is the keyboard shortcut that corresponds to this command. So if we want to get rid of this guy, just go down and select it. So you'll notice if I right, oh yeah, I guess I should talk about that. Right-clicking selects an object, like so. Now, you'll also notice that over here, this guy, it's known as the outliner. Normally, it's called a scene graph. This is a tree of all of the things in your world. It's a quick way of referencing things. You can hide them, you can make them so they can't be selected, or you can make it so they can't be rendered. That's what these three icons here do. So let's say I want to select our cube. I can do it by right-clicking it in the scene, or I can do it by left-clicking it here. Okay, so this is a graph of all of the stuff that make up your 3D scene. And so say if I want this cube here and I didn't want it to be visible anymore, boom, it's gone. And then boom, it's back. If I didn't want to be able to select it, so now when you're in the scene, you can't anymore. There's a very handy thing. You will have it open in almost all of your views. It allows you to dig into things too and get more access to the underlying components or the things. A lot of these things are compounds. So here you can see your cube isn't just a cube. It's also got a material and a texture. You can access the various properties there. And then the next guy that's really important is down here. And this is called, I believe, properties, which was confusing. Yeah, this is called the properties windows as well. So this is properties. This N command brings up the properties of this display, whatever window you happen to have open, whereas this is properties in general. Bad name, but there's a lot of stuff packed in there, like a lot of stuff. It's very, very, very key. Oops, I accidentally kicked into editing mode. I'll cover that in a minute. So across the top, we have a number of different tabs that control different things. And what's available changes based off what you've got selected. So notice I've got a camera selected now, and a bunch of things went away. A light selected, they changed as well. And then geometry selected, there's more stuff because you can't texture map a light or you can't texture map a camera. So like this is the texture tab. So I select camera. Actually, you can texture map a light, but you can't apply a material to it. So material goes away, and so on. But also, you'll notice for the light, there's now a light tab. These are very, very, very critical important. The first one here, your camera, this controls your render settings. When you actually are going to display out to, when you're going to, rendering is the act of taking something in 3D and turning it into 2D, be it a movie or a still image or whatever. So if I want to take this scene right now and I go into my camera, so let's go view and we'll view the camera. So that's what the camera looks like. Okay, and here's your render setting. So if I want to go ahead and render it, I just click that, and then boom, there is my scene rendered. And you'll notice it automatically brought up. Let me press T to get rid of that. This is the image editor we were in a second ago, and it's just brought up the rendered result as your open image. And this is going to be confusing to you for a second, because you're going to be like, what the hell? I want my editor back. Why am I not in 3D? You just come back here again, grab this guy, and just go back to 3D view, and you're back. Now, this is one of those things that's confusing with Blender. You're going to find yourself messing up the interface all the time. Don't worry, don't panic. Even if you really, really, really screw things up, and give me a second, because I'm going to show you how to really screw things up in a second. You can get it all back. I'll show you how to set the default settings and how to restore it back to factory, because that's something you're going to end up having to do a lot. Anyways, this first tab then is in charge of rendering. If you've got a sequence of files to render as audio, as an animation, you pick animation instead of render. You pick how to render it, what resolution you want, the number of frames of animation you want, etc. But it's all controlled with this guy. This next guy is your render layer properties. This is going to be a little bit beyond what we want to deal with right now, so we'll leave that alone. But there's layers. You see them controlled down here, and you can have things in different layers, so that if you've ever worked with Photoshop or Illustrator, etc., where you might have a background, a foreground, etc., you can work in layers in Blender as well. So you can have your 3D model animations, etc., in a different layer. You can have the background in a different layer, the foreground in a different layer, character sprites in a different layer, etc. And this is your overall control for those settings. Next up here is your scene settings. Your scenes, kind of the world itself. You're generally not going to use this too much. Yeah, I think I've only ever used it, to be honest, to if you're using the simulations built in, like the physics simulations, you can set the way gravity works. So here it's negative 9.8 on the z-axis. You can change it that way. You can change overall world settings, etc., or you can change your units of measurement here. So if you want to work in metric or imperial, if I switch over to metric, I go back to the N property here. See, now we're dealing with meters. So before we had 0.0, like arbitrary Blender units. Or if you want to work in screwy ass feet, you can. And that's kind of the only reason why you would come into that tab. It's not really something that you do very often. This is your world itself for rendering. Mostly it's for setting the background lighting, ambient occlusion, and environmental lighting. This is just sort of world level settings, or having a background sky rendered. So if I came in here and I go, hey, come on. There, we now have a sky in our background. So if I go back to our render tab and do a render, see? That's all that's controlling. Nothing really exciting. So that's your global world settings. Again, you're only really going to use this if you're rendering out. This guy, though, is more important. This is where you start getting into the properties of your object. A lot of this is actually overlapped with, I'll go back to 3D view again, this. See, you're kind of seeing the same thing. You can control how things are drawn. So if you want to have the wireframe drawn over your image, you can set it on and off here. You can have it X-ray so you can see through it and not see through it. So you notice as it's turned off, you're not seeing the grid in the background anymore. And control how it's drawn and such. But this is where your properties and your layer settings and such are set for the active object. Linking is for setting basically relationships between two entities. It's an advanced topic. We won't touch on that. Modifiers are interesting. Modifiers are things that you add to something that affect it as a whole. And generally they're added after the fact. So you've got something and then you apply a modifier to it, and that is, it's sort of like a mathematic modifier if you think about it. Like so if you have a number of 100 and you add a -3 operator to it, once that's run, you'll end up with a 97. Well, In the case of Blender, it's being added to, here I'll show you one. Let me see, subdivision surfacing. Subdivision surface is a very common thing. There you go. So subdivision surfaces, basically it takes something and then breaks it down into a whole bunch of component pieces. So what this modifier does is, if you've got a square, for example, it will turn it into 4 squares, into 6 squares, 8 squares, so on and so forth. So what you do is you're basically dividing something. You're splitting the thing up so many times that you're adding more and more and more detail to it. Generally, it's to make something smoother, is what you see happening here. And you've got these two settings here. One is view and one is render. And view is the number of times or the number of iterations that the subdivision surface is happening. So let me just jack that up. You'll see what happens. So a whole bunch of subdivision surfaces applied, and your square essentially turns into a circle. Now, subdivision surface is kind of beyond the topic of here. What you're normally doing is you create like a rough estimate of something, like if I was doing an arm, I could do an arm as sort of, okay, I'll show you a very, very simple version. So ignore the specifics of what I'm about to do. It's beyond what we're going to be talking about, but I will show you a bit more of a realistic example. So I'm just going to extrude that out like so. And then I'm going to just take these. And we'll bevel them down. Oh, hey, it's not supporting that. Let's try that again. Oh, there we go. Alright, yeah. Let's bevel that out. Grab those 3. Do the same. Bevel. There. So, you see, it's a very primitive shape, like so, that. And if I could do these edges as well. I'm making the rough thing of, say, a forearm. Now, with that done, see, there's our newest shape. I'm going to go back and add a subdivision surface to it. And now what you start seeing is how you could make a smoother shape out of a rough shape simply. And so that's the idea behind a modifier. A modifier is applied to the thing as a whole, and it modifies it. It's well named that way. But what you notice here that's kind of neat is this is part of a stack. So right now we have a subsurface modifier. Let's go ahead and add an array modifier. An array modifier is, let's say you have to create a bunch of them. So now we have an array modifier, and it's got a modifier of 2. So let's go ahead and make that into 9. So there's an array modifier. Now, you're still working off the base object, but now we have these 2 modifiers, and they're operating in order. This is key. This is a stack of things that we apply to our entity, I guess, or our objects. And what you've got now is we've got an array of the surface that we created the first time. Now, if I want to go ahead and get rid of one of these modifiers, this is the nice thing. They're non-destructive. So our base object is still unchanged. So we want to get rid of that subdivision surface. We just go ahead and delete it. But look, we still have our other modifier in effect. We don't want it. Delete it as well. So modifiers are sort of like this non-destructible modifiers or operations that can be applied to a shape. It's kind of an advanced topic about what they specifically do, so we'll go beyond that. This is your object data. I don't know. You're not going to be here too much, to be honest. We'll just skip over that one. This is an important one. This is where your material comes in. Now, if you're thinking of games, you're normally thinking in terms of texture. But a texture is actually just a component of a material. See, what you're probably thinking of when you think of a texture is an image map, or like the traditional texture map, which is actually called a diffuse map. So this is what determines the color of a surface. I could come in here simply and go blue, and our surface is now blue. But on top of that, there are plenty of other maps going on. There's specular, which is how light reflects on the surface. You can change the shading, so I could make this 50% transparent. So now you can sort of see through it. You need other objects to really make that shine, pun not intended. Or transparency can be changed as well. And then on top you have, where the heck is emusive? Emusive. Emit. Oh, yeah, emit is emusive. You can actually have your surface give off light. So you see, it's actually generating light now. The material is the base where all this stuff comes from. But on top of material, you also have textures. Textures are normally, well, you think of textures normally in terms of image. So a texture file, you would create a new texture for your surface. Let's see. Create a new one, right? And then generally what you use is an image, image or movie, and then that is the picture that is mapped over top. But at the same time, you can use a number of ones that are built in, like marble. So there we're adding a marble-esque texture to our... So this is part of the material. You can see it's being updated here, but it is actually a texture being put on top. So this controls all your texturing. Finally, we got these two over here. This one's for particle effects. We're not going to cover particle effects too much in this tutorial, but basically a particle system is it's a mathematically controlled model for either hundreds of thousands, or well, tens to hundreds to thousands to millions of instances of normally small particles, which the name comes from. Generally what you use it for is things like emulating smoke, fire. Potentially you could use it for more advanced things like creating hair, or flocking simulations for like if you had seagulls flying in the background or whatever. But it's for when you have a whole lot of stuff and you want to have like a common system controlling it all. So yeah, so they've got emitter and hair as their built-in types. And yeah, you know what? This is beyond what I want to get into. But a particle system is generally just used for those things I just mentioned: fire effects, smoke effects, sometimes fog, generally not. Multiple crowds or large, like where you just have so many of them that they control by one thing. Well, that's a particle system. I'll just go ahead and get rid of that. And then finally, you've got the physics system. You can turn physics on. There's a complete physics emulation system built into Blender. So if you want to do an animation, or if you're using Blender game engine itself, this stuff's obviously much more handy. But it allows you to do things like give physical properties to your scenes. Like I could make this a rigid body. It's going to be pretty pointless. You're not often going to do this, but so there I'm off the ground. I'm going to turn this into a rigid body like so, and that should probably actually be enough. So now when you play, it's going to have gravity applied to it. And you can easily create physics simulations like that quite easy. So I'm going to come in here. I'll add another entity to the scene. Mesh. Let's see. Mesh. We'll add a cube. Yeah, actually, we'll just scale Y and scale X like that. All right. So now our world has a thing in it, and our entity that we've been playing with. So this guy I just applied a rigid body to. A rigid body is a full physics simulation. That means it's modeled in 3D space. The physics engine will update it. It collides with other things, etc. So now we're going to go ahead and add another rigid body. But this one's type will be, I think, passive. Normally it's called static, but I think passive will be enough. And now if I just play, there. So now you can see that the simulation is, this is getting updated and it's running into this. So we can go back to the beginning. I guess I'm showing you a new concept here. This is your timeline. This is your animation over time if you are using animation. A lot of times if you're just modeling, you will never leave frame 0. It does not affect anything otherwise, but let's just move this guy up here. And then you notice when I press play, the physics simulation kicks in, and there you go. So physics are used on a somewhat narrow basis. Sometimes your game engine will support exporting in physics. It's not very common, to be honest, but it's handy when it is. So you might use it that way. If you're creating a cutscene again that's got physical properties and such, this might be the quickest way to animate it. So it's definitely useful that way. Or if you're using the Blender game engine, it's definitely useful. But a lot of times if you're using a game engine, to be honest, you use their own integrated physics systems, not exported from your software. But as you can see, it is available, and that is the finale over this guy. Okay, so that's kind of an overview of the different properties that are available for different things. And now, I cheated you out a bit here, so I showed you some modeling and changing the things without actually getting into it. I'll get into that in a second. We'll cover that at least in this tutorial, because that's a kind of a key thing to be aware of. But let's continue our tour for a little bit here. Again, we just touched on the timeline. You can see here, it goes from 0 to 250, and actually, if you use your scroll bar, you can zoom in and out. Your controls are very consistent no matter what tool. So that's zooming in it. That's my mouse wheel, zooming in and out the details. So you can see frame 110, 112, 114. I keep zooming in. You get 110, 112, 114, so on and so forth. Oops. Okay, I just actually spoiled it a bit there. So let's zoom this guy back to the full range. So I'm just scrolling my mouse wheel here. But you'll notice in my scene, if I do the same thing, scroll in, out. Very, very, very consistent UI across the board. And let's talk about that for a second. When you're working in 3D, and most of the time that's where you're going to live. So this is a 3D view. Remember, this guy with a little cube down it. When you're in 3D view here, a couple of things to be aware of is mostly your middle mouse button scroll wheel. In my case, they're the same thing. And 99.9% of modern mice, it's the same thing. When you're controlling this, when you want to manipulate the camera, there's just a couple of settings to be aware of. Your scroll wheel zooms in and out of your view, like this. So you need to zoom in and around something, you can. Now if you hold it down, so hold down your middle button, or in my case, my scroll button, and then right and left is orbit. Very key. So if you're zooming in around things, and then up and down, okay, very, very, very confusing at first, but you will get used to it in time. So middle mouse button zooms in and out, hold it down, orbit. And then if you hold down shift in the middle mouse button, pan. So you can pan the whole scene. Right? You're not moving anything in the scene. You're just moving your view of it. But very, very handy. Those are the three things you should learn right away. So scroll wheel zooms in and out. Then middle mouse button rotates or orbits. And then hold down shift and you pan. So learn those guys. You're going to use them all the time. Now, another thing that's kind of important, especially in the 3D world, is earlier we popped into our camera view. There's a bunch of built-in views, and this is where having a number pad kicks in. It's very handy. But you can also use the mouse to do this. So you go view here. You can see and they've got the control number pad 3 will jump you to the left. Number pad 3 will jump you to the right, etc. So those are your number pad settings, but you can control them here just as easy. So there's a left view, right view, top view, bottom view, and front view. Now at the same time, so those are default set views from different angles. The second you take your camera though, and zoom in and out is fine, but the minute you orbit, you're back into a user view. Okay? And there's another concept here of perspective versus orthogonal. And that's controlled right here, or using the number 5 key. Now, perspective is it's the way 3D works, and generally you work in perspective. So as I'll do a completely new scene to show you. So there's a new scene, and here is our cube in the 3D world. Perspective view, as it actually gets back, the size is going to change. So we're in perspective right now, and as you moved back here, things that are farther away to your eye are smaller here. Now in a cube that's this small, it isn't that obvious. But this edge here is actually smaller than this edge here, because that's the way your eye works. In faking 3D, when things are smaller, farther away to you, they're like when you see things in the world, as they get further away, they get smaller. Perspective view is faking that effect. And here I'll show you where it gets really pronounced. If I go over to this guy here, right? And I move way out, okay? And now I'm going to go back to the front view. Oh, no, actually, I guess I did it to the side. I'll move to the side view. Now you can really see the effect, right? Big, small. And that's faking 3D as it goes out. Now, where you sometimes have it, something called orthogonal view. And see what happens? It doesn't change in size. So as things go off into the horizon, there's no trickery happening. It's always the size it is, just as it is. Most of the time when you're working in 3D, you'll work in perspective because this is the most logical to your eye. However, if you're actually working in 2D in 3D, which is increasingly common, so you're actually just working with sprites on textured shapes, etc., and layering them on top of each other. A lot of times what you'll actually want is orthogonal view as opposed to a perspective, but you can switch between the two at any time. You can also switch between the two when rendering. Also, sometimes you actually just want it so that when you're editing things from straight on, because it can get a little confusing from your side views when you're in a perspective view, because it looks like things, like if you want to select things that are like overlapped, where the front and the back should be perfectly on top of each other. Perspective view is not always going to do that, but orthogonal always will. So those are your two different options, and you can easily switch between your various different cameras here. Or again, your scene's camera itself. Another neat thing to be aware of, and this is where that N comes in useful. You can actually set it so that, so right now, if I pan this, all I've done is I've jumped out. So I'm using the middle mouse button and orbiting around, right? So let me just jump back to my camera. Oops, I don't have that set up. Jump back to my default camera, like so. There's a setting here, very, very, very useful. It's lock camera to view. I'll just turn that on. You see it gated in red. And what you're seeing here, this little bit is the part that'll be seen if you render. So if I go ahead and do a render here, see, that's exactly what you get. Kick back to the 3D view here. So what we've now done is, as I manipulate my view, like I was doing before with the scroll, see, I'm actually now scrolling the camera. And that's very handy. This is probably actually a setting you want to turn on almost instantly. So once again, it's in the property side, so press the N to bring that guy up, and turn on lock view to camera. Also, the same way as if I hold shift in the middle button, I can now pan the camera around. It's a nice way of gating how you'll see the world if you are actually going to be rendering out. It's something I use quite often. It's a very nice setting. So you can toggle it on and off right there. Now I'm going to show you something that is going to probably be a little scary. Let me just go ahead and gear. So here we've got a 3D view. Right? And remember I showed you here, there's all these different settings. So you can go switch over to UV editing mode. You can switch back to the full 3D view, which is an optimized view just for working in 3D modeling. Your animation view, which brings up your dope sheet and your F-curve editor and such, which mostly for editing keyframes, something we'll touch on if we ever do an animation segment later on, beyond the scope of what we're talking about today, especially because I currently have 19 minutes remaining. But there's all these different views that we switch between. And this guy, we'll go back to the default, or you could even press plus and create my fave view. So now we've even got our own view. Ta-da! And that will be saved in the Blender file. So all these configurations go with the Blender file. So you can now configure the thing however you want. And I will show you how to do this now. This is a confusing topic, so bear with me. It'll scare you, and you can easily undo things later on when you mess them up. So first thing I would recommend is hitting that plus key and making your own view. If you change your mind about it, you can get rid of it just as easy by hitting the X, and now it's gone. So I'm going to go back to pick the one I want to start with, which is the default, and I'll basically clone it and make my view. All right, so it's back. So if you make a view you don't like, hit the X, it gets rid of it. All right, so now we're going to customize the interface to be more to our liking. And you may notice that each corner of every single window has this little thing and this little thing. And they all have it. See, even our menu bar at the top here has them. All of our property windows over here have them. And what this allows you to do depends on which corner you are at. This guy, so I'm just going to come up here and see my cursor changed. There. I left click and drag, and I just split my window. Very cool. All right, so I just split left and right, created a new window. So now I have two views, and I could turn this one, again using this guy down here. So if, say I was UV editing, there's my image editor, and there's my my 3D view. And now let's say I want more views. I can grab this guy again, drag him down, and now I've got two on top of each other, and I can turn this guy into, say, I don't know, let's say we want to have our render settings up all the time. So what you're seeing over here, you set whatever, or you can say, let's go and make this into another UV image editor, but instead we'll make this one in paint mode, where this one's in view mode. So we update over here. Oops. Oh, it's not editable. Or here, let me actually just select something over here. And we will turn this into instead. All right, what am I doing wrong here? All right, it's not really important. So you can configure these windows however you want. Any of the selections here, you can make another 3D view. So if you want to have one that's permanently on your camera and one that is permanently to the right, or if you want to make a Maya or Max like quad view or tri view, let's do a quad view. So we'll split this guy down here, and we will make this view here, say, the front, and then that's the right, and then this one is the top, and this one is the camera. So if I come in here and I change it here, you'll see it's updating all of the different views. So you can split down windows however you want and make them into whatever you want. So if you want to, here's a straight, normal, traditional quad view. Well, the neat thing is you can also get rid of them just as fast as you want. But it gets tricky, because this guy right here, this timeline, I'm modeling. I don't give a crap about animation right now, so I don't need this at all. So I want to get rid of it. Now here's the challenge. In order to get rid of something, the windows have to be the same size. And this is going to take your brain a little bit to get wrapped around. So see, this window goes from here to here, okay? But this window goes from here to here, and this one goes from here to here. So they are not the same size. So we can't get rid of this guy now. So what we need to do is have this guy back. Now this window and this window share the same size, so we can get rid of them. And to get rid of a window, you just also take the drag like you did before, and then move it back. You see how it's got this up arrow thing going on? That will now split it in that direction. So boom, that window is now gone. Now the same way, now we have, I can't split this guy. I can't drag him to the left, because this edge and these two windows are not the same size anymore. So what I would need to do is merge these two guys back together. Again, just drag it up. So now they're the same size. You see what's happening here? So I can either grab this way and bring it over, or let me show you the other way. You can do it from the bottom corner as well and bring it over. So now we have two windows that have the exact same length you see here, and I can now merge them down and get rid of it. So now I have one big window. And it's the same for all these properties at the side here. They all have their own controls. If they're the same size, if they share an edge that's the exact same size, you can merge them across. So now this is one big window, and this is one big window. I can just go ahead and go pop and get rid of it. So as you can see, the user interface here is staggeringly customizable. And even, again, these guys here are just windows. I could replace the entire thing. I could actually just get rid of our menu at the top. I tend to hate doing it because it actually makes life kind of tricky. So let me just unsave that. And here I'm going to show you something very quickly. Now I'm back into default Blender. And as you saw, when I got rid of this top menu, this menu is what allows us to say switch between our different modes. And since I didn't save that blend file, all of the ones I just created are gone. So it's either saved in the Blender or it's saved as a default. Now, if you're using things all the time, well, let's say I hate this cube being made automatically. You may too, I don't know. So I don't want that when I start. So I'm going to go ahead and delete it. So once again, you can just go into Object, Delete, or you can hit the X key, which I'm going to go ahead and do, and say yes to the prompt. Okay, so I just got rid of that guy, and it's gone. So now you come up here and go File, and then go Save Startup File. And then say yes to the confirmation. Okay, so now I've saved the startup file. And you do that after you make settings changes, stuff that you want to apply to every single time you ever use Blender. So the startup file is sort of like a special blend that's hidden from you, where you save your not project-specific settings. So things that you always want to happen. So now I'm going to shut down Blender here. Okay, and I'm just going to come and kick it back open. And no cube. Ta-da! So that is a very handy thing. So you can make your settings. So if I want to come in here and change it so that I am using not using this or using that or whatever. Come in, save the setting. That actually has the same effect as clicking this. Save my startup file. Then when I click and when I load any new Blender instance from now on, it's there. So let's say I came in and I created my own view. So it's like my view. Now my view is, like say that. So there's my default my view. So if I go back to default, there's default. Go back to my view, and my view now looks like this. All right, so I have my own custom view here, and I want to have this view available every time I use Blender. I just come in here, save the startup file, configure it, says yes. And now when I load Blender back up, I have a my view. And in fact, it actually loads it by default because it was the last open when we saved. So you can configure Blender however you want, and once you've got it configured in a way you want to configure it, it's this my view that is somewhat essential to, sorry, not the my view, this save startup file. That is a key thing to you. That is kind of like you're saving your settings, saving your thing. Now, at the same time, oops, I screwed up, and that's going to happen a lot, trust me. Or you're going to install something that's going to screw things up. You're going to mess it up. You're going to want to go back to default factory. Well, that's this guy. So let's load factory settings, say yes to confirmation. We'll close that guy down. Oh, wait a minute. It might not actually do anything there. Yeah, sorry. So come in, you go load default factories, and then boom. So now all of your settings, all your preferences that you've set, all of the changes you have made to the default scene, everything is now undone. Now your default scene though hasn't been changed, so if you want to make it so that it's back to normal always, now save it to the startup file, and when we start back, there's the cube back. So you can modify the heck out of Blender, but if you screw it up, it's very easy to undo. Don't worry about that. It's one of the nice things, but it's one of those things that you're really going to have to learn, especially when you download someone else's blend file and it's all messed up from how you want it to be. Learning how to customize the scenes to what you like is very essential to being very effective in Blender. Because one of the almost first things I ever do when I come in is I load it up, I get rid of that, I hit T, get rid of the side. Generally I keep all of these, but a lot of times I actually want one more, or I am editing, I'm working with texture maps or whatever. So over here I want a UV view and a texture view. So I will often have a split like this. Another thing that's available, if you're in a 3D view like this guy, let me just go ahead and bring up the side view here. There's also this quad view option. And this makes it a little bit more Blender, like it's your three views in one view. These aren't windows anymore. You'll notice there's no, so let me just, oops. Here, I'll get rid of these guys completely so you can see it full screen. It's the top, user, right, and front camera all in a single view. There's no drag drop, no way to change it. I don't actually like this, but when you're working on something in 3 different angles or 4 different angles, it can be very handy. And if you come from a max perspective and you're used to this quad view, it is available. So once again, it's over here in the properties. It's called quad view. I don't tend to use it, but it might be more comfortable for you. It might be where you're from a background perspective. Where am I at for time? 8 minutes. Okay, now I'm going to go back to something I've been cheating at and kind of showing you and not showing you all along. And this is a very key thing to understand in Blender, is down here in your 3D view. You've got a lot of different things going on. But the key ones to know, this guy is essential. And we'll get back to it in a second. But this guy we're going to start with. This is your view mode. So we're a textured cube right now. So I think it's called solid mode. Yeah. If it was texture map, we could switch over to texture mode, which is now going to do some lighting effects from the scene. So this guy is now actually having a bit of an effect, as you can see. So it's simulating things a little bit more. Whereas if we go back to just the flat, all this is just your color, unaffected by lights, etc. You can even get one step further and go to rendered, which is basically rendering the scene in real time. It's very slow. You only do it when you're looking for like a really detailed preview of what you're working on. So it's kind of like one step short of hitting the render button and see what the results are like. But normally what you'll want is either textured or wireframe. Wireframe is just the outline, the mesh shape that makes up your model. Now the neat thing is if you come back to your textured, like so, I showed you earlier with your properties of your object. Let's see, that's this guy right here. you can actually turn the wireframe on. So even if you're not in wireframe, you can have the wireframe shown. But actually, I kind of like that. The other option you've got is Z. And I don't know if Z has the equivalent. Let me see if it does. No. All right, so learn the key Z. Z is X-ray mode. See? And allows you to toggle between seeing through it and not seeing through it. And when you're working in an object in 3D modeling it, a lot of times you're going to want to see the back. And other times you're not going to want to see the back. Z flips between the two. So this means you can stay in nicely either material or texture mode and quickly zoom or X-ray through it. Okay, now the key thing, and this is context sensitive, depends on what you're working on. So if you're working on animation, it's different. If you're working on modeling, it's different, or painting, it's different. There's actually a full set of sculpting tools built in here. Very impressive stuff. We're not going to have time to get into it, but polygon modeling is definitely something I want to touch on the basics of. And I'll probably do a full hour at some point on modeling in the future. If there's interest, if you enjoyed this talk, I'll follow it up with, like I said, a polygon one, maybe one on texturing, maybe one on animation, or at least rigging basics, etc. But this mode is very important because this is what switches your tools and what you're working on and how things work and how everything happens. It's all being configured here. Texture painting is for painting a surface. We don't have a texture, so that's not going to be useful to us. Weight painting is for painting animation effects. Again, not really useful to us right now. Vertex painting, again, not that big to us. Sculpting is how you bring up the sculpting interface itself. But it's object and edit mode. When you're working with models, those are the two things. Object deals with something as a whole. This is an object, right? Edit mode deals with its components. Right? So now we're in edit mode, and you see how we now have individual vertices? So in object mode, when I use this little modifier, I'm modifying the whole thing. When I'm in edit mode, I'm modifying the component. And right now the component mode I'm in is vertex. There are 3 different modes here. You can see here's the control options for them. Is edge, vertice, edge, polygon. All right, or face. I'm not sure what they call it here. Face. All right. So your vertice mode, I could grab, and I'm grabbing a single vertex, like so. So see now I'm editing, and our shape has changed. Now I kick over to edge, and I can grab the entire edge and modify it that way, or I can come over here to face, grab the whole face, and modify it that way. Now I'll bring back up our tools menu, the T over here. So now in face mode, all of this stuff is going to change based off what we have selected. The different properties available for different times. Now let's go ahead and, so what I meant to say is, so here as you can see, you have the option for extrude. Now let me go back to object mode. Boom, it's gone, right? So these are things that you can only do while editing. And editing is where you were creating or modifying your shape. Your basic shape is being done. So I used extrude a number of times before. I'll go ahead and create one now. That, and all you're doing is you're pulling a new face up. So we just created a new one, and then see we're in edge mode. We can grab one of these edges. I can turn X-ray off so we can't see through anymore. We're dealing with a solid now, or you can hold down Shift, keep grabbing more like that. So we just added something called an edge loop. I'll deal with that later on because you can actually grab them with a. Why are you not cooperating? By holding Alt, it will grab the entire edge loop or a continuous circuit. Again, I'll get back to that when we get into the modeling, if I do a modeling one. But this is a key concept to understand. You're either in object mode or edit mode, or in some other mode that you generally don't want to be in. So let me just go ahead and show you an example quickly of a modification we can do here. So I'm going to grab it. I've got all of my faces selected. By the way, that was a hotkey. That's the A. A is select all, and A again is select none. At the same time, B, hold down B, puts you in box mode. So now you can select using a box, or hold down C. Wait a minute. I thought it was C. Oh, C is like paint select. So there are different selection modes, or you press A So select all or none. Very common things you're going to want to do. Again, that tutorial I showed you very early on, the one on Gamefromscratch.com, covers all of your different selection modes. I could do a video specifically on selection and editing. It's a key enough concept. It's important to get into. There's also a lot of keyboard shortcuts. So you can see down here, we switch between vertex, edge, and face. And this is going to sound very unintuitive because, well, frankly, it is. But if you hold down Control and Tab, it pops up this quick menu right here. This is just kind of an example of how keyboard-focused Blender can be. So Control Tab brings up so you can pick which mode you want to be in. So now I'm in edge mode, now I'm in face mode, now I'm in vertex mode. So I can select vertex, I'm going to switch back to edge mode, now I can select edges, or switch back to face mode, and now I select faces. So Control Tab brings this menu up, or Control Tab 1, Control Tab 2, Control Tab 3. So I'm selecting, so Control Tab, then when you got a menu, you can pick 1 will be the first item, 2 will be the second item, 3 would be the third item. So there are you will get so wired and used to using those keys. And those keys probably didn't make it, like, why the hell would you make it built on Control and Tab? Like, that doesn't make any sense. Well, it does, because this is also available on a hotkey. See, we're in edit mode now. Well, if I hit Tab, we're in object mode. Edit, object, edit, object. So suddenly having that tab key as your focus, you'll have your left hand resting on that key at all time. So as you get used to it, those keyboard shortcuts do make a lot more sense. I have 48 seconds to go. I'm trying to think of what I should have covered right away. There's a bunch of things I should have definitely get onto. Like, so here, we've got our modifiers. I'll go back to object. So we're in object mode, and we've got this little widget manipulator here. You can also do the same thing with G. Puts you in grab mode, and you can move it around. At the same time, R, same as picking rotate here. It brings up this widget, allows you to rotate things. And then there's also one for scaling, which is the next guy over. It allows you to make things bigger and then smaller. And we're doing this at the object level, but it can also be done at the edit level. So if I got a particular face and I scale it, I'm just modifying that one face. Ditto for rotation. One face. Now you can get into, oh, I'm out of time. Those can be all controlled again with keyboards. I might actually do a specific video just on keyboards at some point if there's some interest in it. But that's a bit of a look at Blender. That's a quick shot of Blender. I didn't get into any of the specifics of what Blender itself can do. I just wanted to give you an overview of how the interface works, how it looks. We didn't touch on how to actually texture, how to actually animate, what the hell an F-curve is, video editing, all those things. Like, there's a lifetime of stuff to learn in here. But hopefully I gave you enough of a crash course that you kind of can see the interface and not be completely terrified of it. Blender is a great application. It's definitely one of those ones that you should check out. It's worth looking into. It's worth learning more about. And I hope I just gave you a bit of an introduction. Please let me know in the comments if there's things that you want me to cover specifically. I kind of like the idea of this hour format because it forces me to be a little bit more concise, a little bit less wandery, and for future ones, if it's a little bit more focused, I'll do a script, and we'll follow that script, and we will cover very specific things in an hour duration. But let me know the things that you want to see covered. So if you want to learn more about Blender, you like this hour format, please let me know in the comment, and let me know what you want me to cover, and I will do my best. I am now officially at an hour, 2 minutes, and 36 seconds, so I should probably end it up there. I hope you enjoyed it. Thank you very much. Bye.